Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of 10 Adventures, and this is the 10 Adventures podcast. Each week we talk to real people about real adventures as they explore this incredible planet we all live on. Today we're talking about a place that most visitors to Canada say is one of the highlights of their entire trip, but it still is relatively undiscovered. Yes, we're talking about Vancouver Island, and joining me to talk with Alex Ross, founder of Fresh Adventures, is my colleague Karen, a resident on Vancouver Island. If you've ever want to learn about this incredible destination for year-round adventure travel, please keep listening. Hi, Karen. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. How about you, Richard?
I'm doing great. Spring is here, which I know is in bloom where you are as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I live on Vancouver Island, so it's definitely starting to feel like spring right now. The cherry blossoms are coming up, the snowdrops are up, the daffodils are up, and it's not raining too much, so it's pretty sweet.
Well, you're going to like today's podcast because we're talking about your home turf. Today we're joined by Alex Ross, who's actually one of the top 5 adventure guides on Earth. And we're talking about Vancouver Island, which is just a stunning location to explore. Alex grew up on the rocky shores of Georgian Bay. He learned to surf in the cold Atlantic winter storms before moving out west to become a guide and eventually founding one of the top adventure travel companies in Canada. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, thanks a lot, Richard. Made me sound way too cool there.
So first question, Alex, what makes everyone fall in love with Vancouver Island? Because whenever I talk to people, they always just totally love their trips on Vancouver Island.
For good reason and a lot of reasons. Vancouver Island kind of is a surprising destination for a lot of people. We've always kind of worked really hard promoting our Rockies experiences and thinking that that's kind of like the quintessential Canadian experience with all the glaciers and bears and Banff Avenue and everything. But really, over the years, I found what people are really looking for is what they can find on Vancouver Island. One of my favorite things about Vancouver Island is island time, which when I first got to Vancouver Island, it really frustrated me because I'd send out a resume, never hear back from the people, and everyone was like, oh, it's island time, it takes a few months. So it was a little frustrating, but as I kind of settled into it, island time is a real thing. It's a slower pace of life. Things are a little bit simpler there. It's just really relaxed. And I think when people are on a trip, that's a really great thing to find instead of kind of hustle, get to the parking lot early, all that kind of stuff. Vancouver Island really offers a lot of space to relax and really enjoy your destination. Another thing I find really special about Vancouver Island is I find the entire experience is really, really vivid. Everything from your interactions with wildlife, on a daily basis, you see things that you just can't even describe to people, like bald eagles right outside where you're staying, dropping salmon right on the shore, and seals swimming by. I used to live in Port Alberni, actually, and right under our deck, a black bear kind of created a little den, and that was where it would hibernate. So whenever we popped out the door, we'd sort of look over. It had actually stolen a stand-up paddleboard bag, and that was sort of like its sleeping bag for the winter. And so we'd look over and see this little head poking out. And that was sort of just everyday normal life. Same with the vivid. It goes to like the cuisine on Vancouver Island. The seafood is really, really tasty. There are berries everywhere. There's lots of color. The wineries make these really cool fruit wines out of like blackberry port and blueberry wine and stuff. It's just, the sunsets are extra bright there. It's just, everything's really alive.
Actually, it's interesting that you talk about the bald eagles because I used to live in Campbell River and we literally had an eagle nest in our backyard.
Yeah.
So there was a nest of eagles living on trees in our backyard. So you're right. The animal life is really close, very close. So how do you think is the best way to explore Vancouver Island?
I think if I were taking a trip to Vancouver Island, I would explore it in one of two ways or both ways, ideally. First one, I would recommend taking a road trip on Vancouver Island. A lot of people, especially international guests, don't really understand what Vancouver Island is. And they think it's like this, tiny little island that you can just go for a day trip and explore and stamp it off on your passport. But really, Vancouver Island is like 700 kilometers long and takes like an entire day to drive up and down. There are several towns that are worth visiting, different regions on the island that need to be done. So if you have like a week or two to explore Vancouver Island, doing a road trip is a really great way to do it. There are lots of places to camp if you're to go RVing, lots of places to stay if hotels are more your thing. And each town has a really different feel. Like if you stay in, say, Courtenay, Campbell River area, there's some really cool oceanside experiences, some waterfalls and things that are really cool, but it's drastically different than Tofino. So it'd be hard to pick just one of those destinations to visit. And same for if you can get on the water in any way. Vancouver Island is just a coastal wonderland. Sea kayaking is probably the most common and easiest way to plan. And there are tons of different areas that you can sea kayak. Yeah, planning some kind of a road trip where you can see more than one area. And if you can get out on the water and spend a couple nights, that's definitely a bonus.
You talked a little bit about international guests being, not understanding Vancouver Island. I had one friend come from abroad, and they said it was like another version of New Zealand, in that you just had this huge amount of variety in one island. You had, the rough west coast with, big waves and storms. You had the eastern side of Vancouver Island, which is sheltered and calmer. You have mountains in the middle. You have, great farms and growing areas. How can people find all that on a trip? How do you recommend they experience all this variety? And is there more that I haven't even mentioned?
First of all, yeah, I would definitely recommend exploring Vancouver Island in its entirety. And you're right, it is a lot like the South Island of New Zealand, between the mountains, the coastlines. Yeah, it's just got so much diversity and so much area. I would definitely recommend getting out on the water. Like I said, there's several ways that you can do that. I would say sea kayaking, like I said, is kind of the most sort of common way that comes to people's mind. One thing that BC doesn't have a whole lot of is circle canoe routes. And one of the top circle canoe routes is actually on Vancouver Island. That's called the Sayward Forest route. So that departs just a little bit to the west of Sayward. And you can make it like a 3-night sort of would be your minimum. And you could go up to a week for a canoe trip. You'd be running into pretty well nobody. Surrounded by mountains, exploring lakes, paddling down rivers. You probably see more animals than people. Another great kind of way to go exploring is stand-up paddleboarding, which is new to me, but lots of people are taking on and enjoying it. There are places that you can rent stand-up paddleboards all over the island, both on the east and the west coast. And then, of course, river tubing, if anybody's into that. Vancouver Island is actually the only place that I've gone river tubing, but from what I understand, it's actually pretty spectacular as far as river tubing goes. When I lived in Port Alberni, I was kind of wondering where all the locals were because I didn't really see them on the hikes. I didn't see them out of the beach or anything. They weren't surfing. And then one day I went river tubing on the Stamp River. It's dead easy. You just drive a car up to one side, put your tube in, and you have another car down at the bottom to get back up to your first car. And we floated for like an entire day down Sprout and Stamp River. And there were like these warm limestone pools on the side of the river. There were rope swings. We saw salmon. And then we came around a bend in the river. There must have been like 200 people on a beach just hanging out. And so we kind of stumbled across like the local thing to do there. There were little rapids that we went down. It was wild. So that's definitely a really interesting way. I know there's also the Cowichan River. And I think you can do a little bit of tubing up near Campbell River. I think it's on the Campbell River up there. So yeah, definitely getting out on the water.
We also have the snorkeling where you snorkel in the river while the salmon are migrating. And that's supposed to be amazing as well.
It is. Absolutely. It's super cool. I definitely recommend taking a wetsuit, and it gets a little wild if you've ever snorkeled in a river. It's vivid. It's really cool. The salmon are right there. You can dive down and get right among these huge groups of salmon. You're kind of going with the river. So you start at one area and you float down the river. It kind of took me by surprise. We went down like a very, very calm rapid, but you sort of bump down a few rocks, and I've definitely come prepared for a bit of an adventure. And the salmon viewing is amazing. You see bald eagle. They're just out on the banks of the rivers chowing down on some salmon, and if you're lucky, you might see a bear. But yeah, that's definitely a really cool experience.
And you mentioned surfing, and I think Vancouver Island's become a popular surfing destination as well.
Vancouver Island is absolutely a popular surfing destination for a really good reason too. One of the best parts about surfing on Vancouver Island is that there's swell there almost every single day of the year. Most other places in the world that aren't, kind of an off the beaten path surf area, like the east coast of Canada even, you kind of wait around for the swell, where Vancouver Island, it's just a question of if it's knee high or head high kind of thing every day. The summer is definitely the best for beginners, which is convenient because it's also the warmest. The best surf season is definitely in the fall as the winter storms start to come in, but you can catch really good surf there year round, which is amazing. It's not warm. It's not like surfing in Mexico or anything like that. But if you're brave and don't mind the cold water, it's an incredible way to experience it.
Alex, you mentioned the cold water. I learned to surf on Tofino. I'm a terrible surfer, in full disclosure. But I remember it was literally snowing, and I was actually so hot because the wetsuit was like, I don't know how thick it was, but it was a super thick wetsuit that I was actually having to let ocean water in. And so even though it's super cold, the gear I rented, it wasn't bad at all. It was actually like one of my greatest experiences, just catching a wave while snow is falling on the trees and you're the only one there. It was just such a nice experience to do that, and to just experience Tofino when it's, in the off season.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's surprisingly pleasant, like you said.
You were talking about water sports just now, but you also alluded to the mountains on the island, which there are many. Can you tell us a bit about hiking or trekking on Vancouver Island and what's available?
Hiking on Vancouver Island is utterly surprising. A lot of people don't realize that there are mountains on Vancouver Island, and the mountain ranges there are no joke whatsoever. In fact, I'd say if there's one thing that the island could use some more of, would be intermediate hikes. I find when we're planning our tours, we try to do sort of like a fairly moderate, like a pretty big hike, but not huge on a lot of the days. And up in Strathcona Park, it's like a 100-meter walk to a waterfall, or it's like a full day gaining 1,000 meters up on top of a ridge or to a lake. So definitely go prepared for some pretty big hikes in Strathcona Park. Some of the mountains there are massive. I know one of the hikes I did was to Kings Peak. I believe that was 1,800 meters of elevation gain in a single day, which was unreal. That's a big hike. Crest Mountain, there's another, Bedwell Lake, Flower Ridge. They go on. There are tons of them up there. You won't probably hike them all in one trip. I've been there for years, going in and out and hiking, and I feel like I've barely even scratched the surface. I'm actually planning to do a hike this spring to Golden Hind, which is the biggest peak, the highest peak on Vancouver Island, and it's a gigantic ordeal to hike it. Mostly the approach. It's kind of like a 1 or 2 day approach, 1 or 2 day to leave, and lots of up and down, and then the actual hike itself on Golden Hind. And then further south on the island, there are tons of great hiking opportunities as well, and that's actually where you find a lot more of the intermediate hikes. Juan de Fuca Provincial Park is definitely, I'd say, a must-see area, and also where some of the best hiking is.
That's coastal as opposed to mountains.
It is, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, what I was about to say is that Vancouver Island is really unique for hiking. I find elsewhere I want to hike mountains and I want to get up high and see things. And on Vancouver Island, I really don't mind if it's just a coastal hike or even a hike in a forest, because everything's just so much more surreal. You kind of feel like a little ant walking through a forest. The trees are gigantic. There are ferns all around you. Everything's green and lush. There are huge mushrooms growing, berry bushes, little babbling brooks all over the place. And if you're on a coastal hike, there are beaches that you stumble across. There's sea caves to explore, waterfalls landing right on the beach. So some of the greatest hikes on Vancouver Island aren't even in the mountains. Wonderland Park would be one of them, the West Coast Trail, which is kind of the most known one. And then the same sort of thing, but further north would be like the North Coast Trail. And then also a lifetime supply of hikes in the mountains too.
Yeah, you're right. There's so many different hikes and so many different terrains, whether you're having views of the mountains or views of the ocean. There are so many. What do you consider the must-do adventures on Vancouver Island?
Oh, there's so many to list, but I'd say if I were to name just a few, I would say absolutely getting out to the West Coast into Tofino area. There's something about the West Coast that's just so amazing. There are endless beaches. There's the salty air coming right off the ocean. The trees are huge. Everything's really lush. There's wildlife everywhere. Even just sea lions and seals are really cool for people to see. And it's the kind of thing that locals don't even think about anymore. They're just all over the place. In Ucluelet, in the harbor, in the mornings and evenings, you can just hear like tons of sea lions barking at each other. It's pretty wild. So I would definitely recommend a trip out to Tofino, somewhere on the west coast of the island, Ucluelet as well. Hiking in Strathcona Park, if you're into hiking and mountains, I'd say that's an absolute must-see area and a great area to explore. And, it's funny, I don't even mind, like I often kind of guard areas that I talk about and don't give out trails. But on Vancouver Island, everything's so lush that we actually need people to hike the trails because a lot of the trails are getting reclaimed by nature. And it doesn't take long for a trail to be forgotten about and the trail kind of just gets totally overgrown. I had done a hike years ago and came back to it last year and it was completely vanished. I was trying to hike to a lake just to the west of Port Alberni and it was completely gone. So, yeah, it's great to get people out on the trails and hike them just to maintain the trails even.
You certainly don't see as many other people on the hikes on Vancouver Island as opposed to, say, the South Coast Mountains where you have all of Vancouver draining there. So you do feel a bit more isolated as well.
Absolutely, yeah. If you run into somebody on one of the hikes in Strathcona, it's like exciting, where it's sort of like a nuisance in a lot of other places. You want to know where they're from and what their hike was like, and yeah, it's kind of rare, so it's a lot different. One other adventure that I really think is underrated on Vancouver Island, or at least undiscovered. There are two different freighters that you can go on. It's kind of like a really authentic, like ocean cruise experience. Instead of a touristy experience that's designed for tourists, these are supply ships. They bring supplies out in Port Alberni area in Barkley Sound, as well as Nootka Sound area, going from Gold River out to the fishing communities out just to the inside of Nook Island. So they're not really tourist experiences, but they allow visitors to board their ship and ride for the day. And because they don't really rely on, tourism to pay for their fuel or anything, it's really, really affordable. So I think one of the greatest ocean experiences you can do on the island is these packet freighters supplying the little communities. There's one that goes, like I said, from Barkley Sound out to Ucluelet. You can ride it one way or there and back in a day, and then another one out from Gold River. And I think those are super, super authentic. You see animals, you're out on a cruise for the whole day. There's a cafe on board. So I love those. I include them on our tours whenever I can. It's the most bang for the buck, I'd say, on the island.
Alex, the West Coast is famous for the food scene, and the island in particular is famous within BC. Can you tell us a little bit more about, what people can expect, going out to eat on the island?
Yeah, the food scene on Vancouver Island is incredible. There's some really, really, really good chefs and some really cool inspiration coming. I think a lot of it coming from kind of like a foraging perspective or even First Nations and traditional foods. Areas in Tofino and even on the east side of the island, you see a lot of seafood. lots of mushrooms. You see kind of influences from local berries. I would say at a very least, if you're on Vancouver, if you like seafood, you should dive right into the seafood. It's so fresh. It's so local. And seafood is amazing. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to imagine where your food came from if you're right in Campbell River, right beside the harbor, and you're having shrimp or mussels or crab or even salmon or anything like that. I absolutely recommend it. On our tours, we stop off at the harbor actually in Campbell River, and we get supplies right off the fishing boats, and yeah, it's great.
Oh, I remember when I lived in Campbell River, we used to actually go down to the harbor and buy crabs off the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I live in Victoria now. We can do that here as well. So you're absolutely right. You can get it right off the boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Cut the middleman, and it's so fresh. Another great thing about Vancouver Island is that it's, I guess, part of its Epicurean center are the breweries and the wineries and even distilleries. The island is absolutely covered in wineries, and I think Cowichan Valley was actually one of the fastest growing wine regions in Canada at one point. I particularly really like the fruit wines that are on Vancouver Island, but they've got a lot of kind of a huge variety of grapes and really good wines. There are breweries near all the hiking areas, so it's really easy to do like a day hike and combine it with a brewery visit as well. I know the BC Ale Trail has done a lot of work connecting the breweries all up the east side of Vancouver Island. So yeah, it's a bit of a foodie paradise.
Sounds great. Now, when would you recommend people visit Vancouver Island?
Yeah, Vancouver Island, I mean, you can't go wrong. And you kind of touched on this earlier, Richard, when you're talking about surfing in Tofino. People think of surfing as warm and sunny, and Tofino as warm and sunny and kind of a summer destination. There's no reason why you couldn't visit Vancouver Island and have an incredible experience year round. Tofino has actually really embraced this model, and they offer storm watching experiences, which I think is got to be the perfect reframe for nasty weather. But it's exactly as they describe. It's really cool, especially if you're not used to the ocean. There are gigantic winter swells crashing into the ragged, rocky coastlines. It's rainy, it's stormy, it's dramatic, it's windy. You go out on the beach and you feel like you're really braving the elements. And of course, a lot of the accommodations, you can sit right in your comfortable room beside a little fire and curled up on a chaise lounge and enjoy the storms come by. And that being said, when I was living in Victoria just before last winter, I would come back from running some ski tours and go back to Victoria. And I got to say, I feel a little guilty, but I kind of liked it. It's sort of like a snowbird destination. If you're going to go to Victoria in the winter, you're pretty well guaranteed the best weather in Canada. It's not as rainy as everybody says it is, and it's warm. I just remember sunny days going hiking. I rode my motorbike year round in Victoria. So people are golfing in like February there. So you kind of can't go wrong.
There's snow sports as well for the winter on the island. I know there's skiing at Mount Washington and further north at Mount Kane, and then lots of ski touring and snowshoeing in the mountains around there as well. So
absolutely.
You could be golfing in Victoria and then the next day be up in the mountains skiing.
Well, that's the great thing about the mountains right beside the ocean. Like you said, you could golf, surf, ski all in a day and eat some seafood for dinner. It's kind of perfect. And a lot of people don't realize how good the skiing on Vancouver Island is. The terrain at Mount Washington is really, really fun. They get a ton of snow. And a little further north of there is Mount Kane, which is kind of rising in popularity as one of the most sort of rustic ski area charm sort of places. It's like rope tows, you're on your feet all day. The terrain is epic. The people are smiling. Everyone knows each other. They're camping in the parking lot. It's like a scene out of a magazine every time you go there.
Alex, you've taken, so many guests to Vancouver Island. At the end of a trip, what do they say? What surprised them about, spending a week on Vancouver Island? I
would say, among a lot of things, I would say probably the thing I hear the most is that people are surprised by the weather. A lot of people think of Vancouver Island and the West Coast as kind of like foggy, gray, raining, wet. But Vancouver Island actually is almost like a desert in the summer. It's lush, and the moss and the rainforest hold a lot of moisture, but it doesn't rain for the most part for 4 or 5 months. And you can get forest fire conditions on Vancouver Island. You can get long, long dry patches, sunny every day. It's not uncommon for it to be 35 degrees Celsius and sunny for like a month at a time at certain parts of the island. Tofino is definitely a little bit colder and gray, kind of what people are expecting, but that's also what makes it so special. Without that fog, there wouldn't be quite as much wildlife and lush rainforest. But yeah, you can really find some real summer weather on the West Coast. And if there's another thing, it's probably the size of the island. People don't realize that it's a huge place, and it takes a long time to explore it all.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing, this beautiful place, Alex. If people have a question, where can they find you?
Totally, yeah. I'm always happy to help people plan their trips and give them some insight. Probably our most active social media is Instagram. We're at Fresh Adventures Canada on Instagram. Feel free to send us a message. We're always posting about sort of local gems that we like to explore. And we're always happy to answer questions and get messages from fellow explorers.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. And we'll also share links to some of your tours in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Yeah, sounds great. Thanks a lot, Richard.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alex. Cheerio.
Awesome. Have a great day, guys.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you liked it, why not give us a review? Better yet, subscribe and get inspired again and again. Also, if you want to find your own adventures, why not check out 10adventures.com, where you can use our free resources to plan your own trip or book a tour in over 60 countries and make your own epic memories on your next adventure.